Good evening. This is Rabbi Tzim Mandel from Congregation Kahal B'nai Yisrael, community of Jewish friends of our Zelzitz. It's a Monday night. Pashas told us, and I'd like to tell you a phenomenal story. But the Helika Kapitchin Tzedeb we spoke about him so many times. Rabbi Avram Yeshua Heschel, Grand Rabbi Avram Yeshua Heschel, who lived on the Lower East Side, passed away in '67 after the war. And the story goes as follows that I heard from one of the people that was there when it happened. It was a Yom Kippur afternoon. And the Holy Kapitchin Tzedeb says to his young Chassidim, "Come, I want to teach you something for life, that you have to know for life." So they all go with the Rebbe. He goes out of the shul to the corner. And on the corner of where his shul was on East Broadway, there was and has been for many years, maybe it still exists, a non-kosher restaurant. And the Helika Kapitchin Tzedeb looks through the window as if he's looking for someone. And he walks in with his boys to one certain person. And he says to him, "Reb Yid, Hantas Yom Kippur, today's Yom Kippur." And the Yid says, "Yeah, I know." He keeps on eating. And he says to him, "You know you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur." He says, "Yes, I know." And he keeps on eating. So the Rebbe says to him, "My dear brother, you know it's Yom Kippur. And you know you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. And you're eating, you should eat with a good appetite." And he walks out. And these young yeshiva boys are looking at him, and he's looking at them, and he says, "What do you look at me for? You also studied Tractate Chulin, and it says that one can do a sin either out of anger, hatred, rebellion, really wanting to get back at God, or one can just do a sin because he can't hold in his appetite for some nice meat maybe, or something that tastes good, or whatever it might be. I wanted him to have a good appetite." How do we understand this story? Of course, one has to be on the level of the Kapitchin Tzedeb, to do such a thing and to understand the depth. But we can understand a little bit also after the Second World War, where so many Jews saw their parents, siblings, perhaps their wives and children slaughtered by ugly Hitler, and the hatred towards the Jew. One can, and many have, build a hatred towards Hashem, God forbid, towards the Torah, inadvertently in many cases. Innocent people became rebellious and not wanting to know anything about Judaism, not giving it over to their children. I've met many of these people over the years. So the Rebbe wanted very much that this person should have a joyous appetite as he's eating on Yom Kippur, rather than having any thoughts of rebellion. Perhaps a couple of months before, he lived through what the Jewish nation lived through, 6 million of us, and he didn't want any of that to be in his head at the time. What a story. The following story I heard from Rabbi Spiegel the Cedarhurst Rav and Rebbe, Ostrakalshina Rebbe. He told me the story he remembered when it happened on the Lower East Side. He's also an East Side person. He was brought up on the East Side. So he knew the Kapitchins Rebbe's Chanukah. His father was also a Rebbe on the Lower East Side. And he tells me that there was a person that came with the ships that the American soldiers brought Jewish people to New York from the camps. And there was one Jew that before they left Europe, the soldiers let him go on the ship, but his wife they didn't let. So he begged them, our children, our parents, everything we know, everyone we know, everything familiar to us was killed, was destroyed. Please just allow my wife to come with me to the new, beautiful country, the land of opportunity, United States of America. And they said to him, no, we have a quota. You'll see your wife in 2 weeks. Anyway, he came to New York, and weeks went by, much more than 2 weeks went by, and he still didn't see his wife, didn't hear of his wife. There was no communication. Communication was very hard those days in any case. And one day, he's walking on Lower East Side, and he meets a fellow Jew, and he says to him, Reb Yid, today I'm going to commit suicide. And he says to him, please, please, I imagine you've been through who knows what, and everybody was, trying to feel the other's pain. Yidden from Europe were coming to America. And he says, no, I'm going to commit suicide. And the person says to him, why don't you go to Henry Street, the Rabbi Heschel, the Kapitchins Rebbe? He says, don't tell me about Rebbes. I've seen Rebbes slaughtered and thrown into the furnace just like all of us. Rebbes are just as human as we are. Why are you telling me things? Why are you giving me new hope so that I should look towards, whatever it is? My wife's not here. My whole family was destroyed. My whole town in Poland was destroyed. Everything that was familiar to me is naught. Why are you selling me faith and emunah and tzaddikim? The Yid said to him, listen, you're about to commit suicide. I'm not telling you not to commit suicide. Just go to the Rebbe first. Okay, so he listened. A Yid is always soft, has a soft personality. And he goes to the Henry Street. And he walks in and speaks to the Rebbe, and he's sitting and crying, and the Rebbe is sitting and crying. In the middle, which the Rebbe says to him, Reb Yid, tomorrow morning go to the port, because your wife's going to walk off the first ship. He was elated, couldn't sleep the whole night. Wow, the Rebbe told me. After all, he did have emunah. He did have the basic faith that every Jew has. Faith in Hashem and His servants. So the Rebbe said, and the next morning, at 7 o'clock, he's already by the port, and sure enough, his wife walks off the boat. So the whole East Side was talking about the great Meifus, the great miracle that the Rebbe performed. As a decent human being, him and his wife went to say thank you to the Rebbe. He came in, the Rebbe was so happy that we're talking. And in the middle, the Rebbe says, wait a minute, I've heard that on Lower East Side they're saying that Kapitchins Rebbe performed the miracle of Meifus. Kapitchins Rebbe doesn't perform any Meifus. I don't do those things. So the fellow says to the Rebbe, so how did the Rebbe know? So he says, how do you know I did know? All I know is that after you walked out, I said to Hashem, Tata, Father in heaven, you know I never said a lie in my life. Don't let me say a lie. Don't let this be my first lie. Who could have the guts to say that to Hashem, right? Okay, we will start some of the Ha Chaim HaKadosh on this week's Parsha. Parsha's told us, and so the Ha Chaim asks a question. The pasuk says, the verse says, right in the beginning, chapter 25. These are the children of Yitzchak, the son of Avram. Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. So, one must understand, instead of mentioning the children of Yitzchak, the Torah speaks about the birth of Yitzchak. These are the children of Yitzchak, the son of Avram. Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. What does that mean? Second of all, what does he have to tell us? What does Hashem have to tell us in the Torah that Avram gave birth to Yitzchak? So he says as follows. The children of Yitzchak are spoken about, enumerated at the end of the Parsha. But since he mentioned the children of Yitzchak, the Torah is teaching us that since we know that when Yitzchak was born, his neshama was a female neshama, Sitra de Nukva, and he wasn't able to have any children. So how did he ever have children? As we learned about in last week's Parsha. So therefore the Torah Kedosh says, Avram held des Yitzchak. Avram, his great father Avram, was able to turn over his neshama from female to male when he shechted him, when he was going to slaughter him on the Akedah. And in this merit, Hashem gave him a nefesh of duchra, a soul of a male, and therefore he was able to give birth. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is, we find the Gemara says in Yevamis 64a, that later on in the Torah, in this week's Parsha, we find Vayei Eloi Hashem accepted his prayer as opposed to his wife's, Rivka, because there's no comparison between a tzaddik, son of a tzaddik, righteous, the son of a righteous, and a righteous one, the son of a wicked person. So, since his father was so righteous, Hashem listened to him and gave him children. So this is another reason why the Torah is mentioning now about his giving birth, to mention the greatness of his father, that his father was the medium for him to be able to have children. So it's another part of the last answer that we said, that because of the Akedah he was able to have children, but here it stresses more the part of his father Avram having, on a spiritual level, his being able to have children because of the righteousness of his father. A third interpretation, he says, the Medrash says right here, Rishus Rabbah 63, that we find a verse in Yeshaya Chavtes, in Isaiah 29, verse 22, that says, El Beis Yaakov Eshapadas Avram. The household of Yaakov, of Jacob, rescued his grandfather Abraham Avraham. So the Chazal teach us over there, the sages teach us that in the merit of Yaakov, Avraham was rescued from the Kivshin Eish when they threw him in the fire, when his own father, the idol worshipper, told the king to throw him in the fire. So it comes out, according to this, that if not for Yaakov, who wasn't even born yet, but Hashem looked through the generations and saw Yaakov, and in his merit, he saved Abraham, he saved Avram many years before. So this is what the Torah means over here, Avram Holides Yitzchak, that without Yaakov, who was a child of Yitzchak, Avram already would have been burnt in the fire. Fourth interpretation. We find, the Medrash says in Bereshis Rabbah 30, that there's something very interesting, unique, and different about Yitzchak, Isaac, as compared to any of the other, definitely the other two patriarchs and any of the other great tzaddikim, righteous people that are mentioned in the Torah. What's different about him? That it's not known the tests and the greatness, how righteous he was, from the simple verses that you read throughout the whole Chumash Bereshis, the whole Torah. Though we find that he did stick out his neck to get slaughtered by his father, as we just had in the Torah by Akedah Yitzchak, but still in all, that's not so simple either, because we find the Even Ezra in chapter 22, verse 5, says that it was done against his will. Though nobody agrees with the Even Ezra, but there is such a view. There's a Torah view like that from one of the greatest commentaries. So the Ha Chaim says, therefore the Torah tells us, Ve'ela told us Yitzchak ben Avram, these are the children of Yitzchak ben Avram. Look at the person who gave birth to him, and from him you should learn about the person who was giving birth to, even though it doesn't say much about him. And therefore it says Ben Avram, as we find sometimes Ben doesn't mean a son only, but it also refers to specifically a Ben Chacham, a wise son, a holy son, as it says in Mishlei, chapter 10, verse 1. So the Torah is telling us that he, Avram, was on such a level of love of Hashem and the righteousness that he worked on and toiled on to become who he was. And the Vav of Ve'ela, Vav always means to add, teaches us that his son Yitzchak also went through many tests, even though we don't see it in the Torah, and he was more hidden, but we have to believe that he also went through so much to be who he is. Interesting, the end of last week's Parsha on the Haftarah, the Chidah mentions a Chazal, quotes from the sages, that whenever it says Vav in a pasuk, it means that an unwritten word is there, so that what you will see after this has more to it than you could see from this simple interpretation of the Torah. Okay. Stop here meanwhile, and we will go now to learn some Mishnayos for the memory of my brother who just lost his son last week. Never should happen to any human being. Zeichen Nishnas Yochen ben Ha Chaim HaKadosh. We're up to the second Mishnah in the first chapter of Krisis. and we'll read it from the English translation, or parts of it will be from there. For the following one is liable for kares if committed willfully, and to a sin offering, that's the Chanukah, if committed inadvertently, and to an asham tali if not verifiable. Asham tali, as we'll learn, is a carbon, a sacrifice that one brings when it's not sure whether he committed the sin or not. Excepting one who defiled the temple or its holy things, since he is liable to an oila v'yared offering. So says Rabbi. We'll soon, I think this part will translate. We'll explain what the translation means. But the sages say also the blasphemer, since it is stated in Bamidbar 15:29, you shall have one law for him who acts in error, which excludes the blasphemer who performs no action. Now, the Kati has an introduction to this Mishnah. It's not long. In continuation of the preceding Mishnah, we here learn that all willful transgression involving kares, except for the Passover offering and circumcision. If you remember, we said over there that these are the only two mitzvahs that we have, that if one doesn't do it on purpose, willfully, then they get kares. That's the Passover offering, the Korban Pesach, and Bris Milah. Now, so in continuation of the preceding mention involving kares, carry a sin offering if committed inadvertently, and an asham tali if the transgression is doubtful, as will be explained. For the transgression of the following prohibitions, one is liable to kares if committed willfully, as specified in the previous Mishnah, and to a sin offering if committed inadvertently. Thus, concerning idol worship, it says in Bamidbar 15:27, the verse says as follows: and if a single person sin through ignorance, then he shall bring a she-goat of the first year for a sin offering, just as willful idol worship involves kares, and a sin offering if committed inadvertently, so also is there a sin offering for any inadvertency whose willful commission entails kares. Thus, for having relationships with a woman forbidden to him, believing her to be his wife, he made a mistake, or he profaning the Shabbos, believing it to be a weekday, he thought it was Tuesday. However, total ignorance of the Shabbos law, etc., is not considered an error, but an unavoidable circumstance for which one is exempt from an offering, as Rashi says and the Bartanura says. Some authorities treat the latter as an error, requiring a sin offering, even if he grew up among non-Jews and knows nothing about the law. So the Tiferes says, and to the asham tali, if the violation is not verifiable. Example given. If a permitted and a forbidden piece of fat lay before him, he has a piece of pig in front of him and a piece of kosher meat, and he ate one, but doesn't know which it was, he incurs an asham tali, a suspensive guilt offering, which affects atonement for a doubtful violation and suspends heaven-imposed punishment, God forbid, until he verifies the transgression and brings a sin offering if it was actually transgressed. Excepting one who is in doubt whether he defiled the temple or its holy things. In other words, whether he entered the temple and he wasn't supposed to, or he ate holy food in an impure state inadvertently. Eating the sacrifices requires certain holiness, going to the mikveh and other things. He is not liable to an asham tali, since once he knows that he transgressed, he is liable not to an ordinary sin offering, but Oil v'yared. What's oil v'yared? Rising and falling. Sin offering. In other words, a lamb for the rich person, 2 turtle doves or young pigeons for the poor. The Torah says that a poor person doesn't have to spend so much money as the rich do on a lamb, but it's good enough for the 2 doves or young pigeons. And 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for the even poorer for a sin offering, as we see in Vayikra 5, 2-11. An Ashan Tali is brought only for such doubtful transgressions which, when known to have been committed inadvertently, require a fixed sin offering. Okay, these are the words of Rameya. However, the sages say, also the blasphemer brings neither a sin offering for inadvertent transgression, nor an asham tali for a doubtful transgression, since it is stated concerning the obligation to bring a sin offering. In Bamidbar 15:29, you shall have one law for him who acts in error, which excludes the blasphemer who performs no action, not being liable to a sin offering for a known inadvertent transgression. He is not liable to an asham tali for a doubtful transgression. The halacha follows the sages. Stop here. Meanwhile, we will do a little bit of the more advanced laws of Chanukah that we started, and we'll read as follows. So the Torah, as we read before, speaks about the 8 days and why the amount of 8 days. So there's 2 interpretations. Either because the Ran says over there in the tractate in Shabbos, where it speaks about Chanukah, that they did have pure oil, but it took a distance of 4 days each way to go get it. That's why they needed 8 days for going and coming back, as opposed to other interpretations that say that it was actually only a day away, but they needed 7 days of, they themselves were impure, so they had to cleanse themselves first. We'll stop here meanwhile. Have a great night.